I knew as a kid, there's 4 of us. We knew Saturday mornings was cleaning the house, working in the yard, and then there's breakfast. We wash the dishes. We are free to do whatever on Saturday. Sunday was get your clothes ready for school on Monday. If you have anything to iron or to wash, get it done because we're not going to do any of that Monday morning. So there's that place for chores. But after that, it's like, I'm going outside to go play. Okay, great. Go outside, go play.
Right. You're free for that. I'm going to kick the cat
free.
out. Hold on.
But this weekend, the husband, I'll wait till you come back. So I don't have this.
He will ignore me for 4 hours, but as soon as I get on here with you, apparently.
Was that the cat?
That was the cat. But right, like with Ron,
I was doing my research just on like incest and rape culture, and I went down a rabbit hole, and I was looking at how, depending on the state or the territory, incest is either seen as the worst thing ever, and so you can be imprisoned for life and fined, or it is seen as just something that happens, so you're like, maybe a year, no more than 5. Yeah. I was like, okay, what are you doing over there?
Yeah.
And so
what's happening there? Huh?
Like, what's happening? Like, okay. So, you start, at least for me, I start writing down all the questions that come to mind. Like, first of all, ew, like, ew. And why would an adult ever go after a child, let alone a child that is in relation to them? Like you just. So I found myself going down that rabbit hole, and I didn't have an answer. And then I thought to myself, do I even have the tools to speak about it with, I'm going to say, kid gloves that it needs to be handled with? So I thought to myself, when we talk about no abortions, no matter if it was incest or rape, and you look at rape culture, and they typically blame the victim, that, this kind of stuff only happens, we'll say women first. It only happens to women because you did something that caused, if you were a good girl, then you wouldn't have this problem. Like it would not have happened to you if you didn't dress this way, speak this way, act this way, promote blah, blah, blah. These things would not have happened to you if you were a good girl. So you get this blaming, this victim blaming, victim shaming, all the things. And so you are traumatized by the events, what happens after, so emotional, mental, like all of it, right? And then you find out that you're pregnant. And when you think about creating a family across the board, that decision between those two partners is made with love. Like there's love involved there, be it same-sex couple or heterosexual, whatever. There is love that says, hey, I want to create a family and raise a good human being with you, right? Like that's, now whatever happens in the future is, but 2 people have agreed that they are going to start this family and raise this family together, and but it's all done with love. And then you have the situation where someone is pregnant, but there was no love involved. It's
well, and so I read this opinion article. I probably was 20, maybe 19. Knowing me, I probably still have this newspaper clipping somewhere. If I find it, I'll send you a picture. And it was a woman who was talking about how She had been raped in her early 20s and gotten pregnant and kept the baby. I can't recall if she was allowed to, I believe she was not able to have an abortion, that it was illegal. And she expressed gratitude for that. She said, well, I'm really glad I kept my baby. I love my baby. And I've thought about that off and on. And what you're saying, I think, is a really important point, is that it's a decision and a choice. She didn't have a choice, but she didn't have a choice of action. She did make a choice of love, to love her child. She wrote an op-ed, so I'm assuming her child knew this. I can't even imagine how you carry that as a child. And at the same time, I'm like, all right, when it comes right down to it, when I talk about bodily autonomy and when I talk about respecting women's right to choose, that's what I mean. She had, if abortion is legal, then women who feel that they want to choose to love their child and bring that child out from violence into the world, and they feel like they have the resources and the capacity and the emotional intelligence, whatever it is, to make sure that child has a good home and an emotional center, I think they should be able to do that. And they can, in the environment in which abortion is a healthcare decision that is legal. And they can do it in this current environment where it's becoming more and more restricted. The same is not true of the person who feels like they aren't ready for that responsibility, that they can't bear that they're going to burden the child with their rage and hate. I mean, I look at how I get when people cut me off on the freeway. So I feel like, what you're saying is really powerful. And also there are people who might just say, well, I choose that. You know what? You can. In both scenarios, you would still have the freedom to make that choice. What I hear is people wanting to take that, to force that. And very few people are capable of showing grace and love in the face of that type of coercion. I'm not saying it isn't possible, but if you're coercing someone to show up in this way, they have to do an awful lot of spiritual growth in the middle of their trauma. And it seems like it's counterproductive from my personal view of what I think a loving, caring, and nurturing society would provide, let alone a loving, caring, nurturing religious community or wherever you're coming from. To me, that feels like it really misses the point of what you were saying, what is a family? And it's these decisions of love and accountability and connection, right?
Yes. And this is where it shifts. Because like you, I wrote down the question of, because I was just, I'm talking out loud. Now it's just me in this room, me and all my cells in my eyes. They're like, yes, of course. I'm like, well, so then I thought, you have this child. Does the child know that they were not conceived from love? But then it's just because we're talking about an adult. What happens when it is now the child, 10, 12, 11, 13, 14 years old, that this was done? It's still rape, but it's incest. What happens there? Because we're talking children who don't have all of the emotional intelligence, haven't even started living their life. They are children. And now you're forcing a child to grow up with this, in my opinion, adult event, right? Because the idea is that you're at least 16. If you're going to, in my opinion, you're still a kid there too, but a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old that is still doing what 10 and 11-year-olds do, which is play and imagine and go to school and do all that kind of stuff. You're now forcing them to experience this adult experience.
Yeah.
That's not the same as the adult woman who went through this, right? Like you're taking someone who by default is taught, trained to respect elders, follow their rules, follow their lead because they are adult and you are a child.
Yeah.
And this is what they're asking for.
And theoretically, it's because the adult knows things and is watching out for your safety and best interests, right? Like it's not blindly follow anybody.
Yes.
Technically.
Thank you for adding that, because that
right?
is there.
Right? Because that's the thing, is like the reason that we tell children, you know, the reason that when my kids were younger, I would sometimes make decisions they didn't like because I could see a longer view. Yeah. And that was my role and my responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I feel like when you have a good community, the community can help you with that. You can have aunts and uncles and friends who show up and provide that type of support and reinforcement. You want them to trust those people, mm-hmm. or to at least learn how to identify where they do and don't align, because that's part of learning, mm-hmm. how to be in society and community. And yet also we have this other thing where these people sneak in who are wanting to use that trust, mm-hmm. that is given for intent, you know, we want it to be for the interests of the child's best development, but they want to use it for their own insecurities, wounds, and selfish, you know, things. And that to me is also another piece of what, to go back to what you said, when I mean, I look at, you know, 30-year-olds and I'm just like, that's interesting. I don't say anything out like that, but it's just not where I'm at in my life, right? Like I see, you know, like and they're doing stuff and I'm happy, and I'm just like, for the most part, and I speak generally, please, I'm not putting anybody down for their age. It just, mm-hmm. I don't understand how a 40 or a 50-year-old looks at someone who's in their 20s or teens and thinks, wow, that's gonna be fun. Because to me, that's just it's not where I'm at in life. And I feel like there's a lot of other things that we could talk to, and we're good at rabbit holes, but that what you were saying, like, how do you take the sacred trust of community and of, you know, being a trusted adult, right? Like, it doesn't even have to be a parent, because we mm-hmm. choose children into our lives in so many ways. Yeah. You know, my kids, so many of the parents that I know, and I did the same thing when my kids were middle school and high school, like we took kids in, you know, kids are having trouble, or their family doesn't accept them, or, you know, whatever. And they stay at your house for a month or two. You've always got extra kids because they're working it out. And you want to be that. You want them to have that safety net and that ability to kind of, mm-hmm. you know, go and not end up in a really dangerous or, you know, even without predators, there's still the elements, right? Yeah. Yeah. So still the elements. I don't know. I feel like the thing that I find really interesting is a lot of the folks that I assume would support the legislations that are making these healthy decisions and healthcare decisions more difficult for women and young people, children, to make in their best interests. They would also equally say we ought to be taking care of these people, these young people, that they deserve a safety net. Right. And so that the gap between that is like frustrating and also interesting to me. Like it's what we talked about on the show that I did with you, like the guest filter. I don't think our values and our goals are all that different. I don't understand how we're not connecting around it. And I can't find the thing that makes that the only thing that I get to when I follow my own rabbit hole and try to untie the knot is it's not really about children and safety. It's about control.
I have to go there, because you hear people talk about it's the sanctity of life, it's preserving the sanctity mm-hmm. of life. And I thought, but what about the child that was just raped by this adult or their father, uncle, whomever, right? Like, what about their life? Because it seems as if they're like, well, you know, they're damaged goods, so can't say that, but I can save this one. Mm-hmm. It's like, but you can't have, you know, it's what, chicken and the egg? I need the chicken to get the egg. Right? Like somebody, right. I'm trying to, but it feels as if you throw all of that away. You talk about the sanctity of life and preserving it, completely missing that you have a 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old, whomever, going through a highly traumatic event. Mm-hmm. Your sole purpose is, we just gotta say that baby. Forget everything else. I'm like, how do you just completely forget that this child's life, child is the key word there,
Yeah.
has been like how do you just ignore that and make it seem as if, well, this is just
Mm-hmm.
part of life, things happen,
Mm-hmm.
and just gonna have to deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like, I am confused. I
Yeah.
found myself getting, I don't want to, well, we can say confused in terms of there's not really a good answer for some of the decisions that are made or the reason why they do that. I believe like you, it's about power. I do believe there's that in there. I'm not exactly sure who wins from it. When people say, well, I'll take the kid, I'll adopt the kid, yada, yada, yada. It's like, okay, well, what happened to that? Because there's quite a bit happening, and that's just with women, young
Mm-hmm.
girls and women. You don't hear about, not as often, or you hear about it much later, from what I could see, in terms of rape culture when it becomes a heterosexual male. Because
Mm-hmm.
the idea is men don't get raped. And if they do, you weren't strong enough to fight it off, or perhaps you wanted it. Perhaps you led somebody. It goes back to that same victim blaming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is
Well,
why so many of them are like, I'm not going to say anything about it.
yeah, I read a statistic about burglary. There was a small percentage of burglars, and I'll look this up. So if it's not true, guys, you'll know. Maybe G will cut it. But I was reading about male rape. It is underreported, and because men feel so much shame if they are raped by a man.
Mm-hmm.
And so burglar would say that, if someone confronted him, he raped them so they wouldn't report the burglary.
Really?
It was a tactic, which I thought was gross, and also the power of the social conditioning. And then I've known a few men my age who, when they were 16 or 17, were coerced or seduced by older women.
Yes.
And they were not, like, when they shared with their friends, like, this happened, they didn't feel good about it. They were immediately given to understand they needed to pretend they felt good about it. They needed to pretend that they bagged someone, kind of thing. And so I think men do have like they have their own difficult pathway through it.
What's that movie with Mrs. Robinson? It's escaping me.
Isn't it Mrs. Robinson?
Is it Mrs. Robinson? You make me, hey, like I told you, girl, we kind of.
Look it up. Yeah. Well, it's a song. Hold on. Let's find out.
We know the song is Mrs. Robinson, but it came from, wasn't it
The Graduate.
The Graduate? Yeah. Thank you. With what's his face?
Mm-hmm. Oh wait. I'll just keep looking. Hold on. I got you. Thank you, Google, for helping us here.
I don't know why I'm thinking like Robert. I know you're gonna look it up.
I've got it right here. Dustin Hoffman.
And
Bancroft, Catherine Ross.
I can see. You know how you can see the scene, but you can't get the names. You're like sounds with the. Okay, when you have movies such as that make it appear that it is okay that you've got the cougar or whatever, you start telling people of all ages it's perfectly fine for this older woman to groom the young man, right? And I remember a period of time in the 90s with all the teachers it was like every other week there was a teacher who was seducing some young student somewhere, and I was like, what is going on? Like, what is going on with all the teachers? Now, I will say this. I do believe there were a number of students who more than likely had a crush on a teacher or professor somewhere. I believe the majority of us were like, we're never going to actually act on it because, like, ew. I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But somewhere somebody said, forget them lines. I'm finna erase these lines. Because I just feel in my heart that he's my soulmate. I know he's only 14, but he's my.
that's the, like, is to go back to that's the part that confused. Like, when I was young and I heard the stories, you know, I don't know about you, when I was young, I was like, oh yeah, you know, I'm all grown up, whatever. And so I didn't have the same, I think, contextualization for it, right?
Mhm.
But now, as I've gotten, you know, more mature and I've had experiences in life, it is more baffling to me, because I'm just like, I don't see how a 14-year-old would be emotionally attractive, let alone physically attractive, to an adult human. And let alone, like, even if you don't have that parental or sacred trust or trusted adult instinct, right? Like, some people don't. They're like, kids, whatever. Still, the next step is neutrality or irritation, right? Like, and I think it's, I mean, I, like you said, like, we're not, you know, psychologists. This is just us talking. But my observation is that it's a insecurity and an inferior. It's kind of like incel culture,
Yeah.
where it's this entitlement of, and this, I'm special. I can break the rules, and like, all of that kind of coming together. And
Or
there are
lack
some
of
people who are,
development.
right, lack of development. And, you know, there are people whose, like, sort of thing that turns them on is getting away with stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I get there's a lot of things that lead to it. And I think that, I mean, we are very immature as a country around sex and sexuality, as noted by this
Very.
things that we're doing. And it's also one of the things, you know, to coming back to because it's tricky, right? Because kids are their own, you know, sort of different group, right? And then women, but I would say bodily autonomy for children and women, both women and children, are often treated like property.
Yes.
Even though we don't necessarily still treat them like property in more overt ways, the assumption is that they kind of belong to you. Like, it's one thing I noticed is that when my kids were younger, is that a lot of parents will assume their kids' time belongs to them. Like, they don't get to like manage their own time. And it's a balance, right? Like, because you also pay all the bills, so there's a certain amount of they have to help a little bit with stuff. But at the same time, like, if you have a plan, you say, this is when I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And then the rest of their time maybe it should be theirs.
Oh yeah. I mean,
right. Like, so Sunday you had free time.
So
you got to do what you wanted to do.
Monday was school. Well, Monday through Friday was school. Then you came home, you did your homework, and then you are, again, whatever little time you have, you got a little bit of time to watch TV or whatever else. But the husband and I went down this court rabbit hole, this family court rabbit hole. And it was interesting when you talk about property, how some parents speak about their kids as if they are property.
Yep.
Like, these are my kids. It's like, it takes two to make that. So, but it's in the way they speak about, I always assume you get joint custody by nature because there's two of you, unless someone just decides, I don't want to be that person or whatever. But the way that some of these parents were speaking about their kids as if it's just a property thing and not time with my child and blah, blah, blah. It was interesting when you say that. So I can see how people see their kids as property. We know that women, to a certain extent, are still seen as property. That is still there.
Well, and the time thing it's tricky too, right? I just think about it in that way, where in many heterosexual relationships, if there's like a time infraction, it's often borne by the woman. They saw that in the pandemic when the kids were home from school. The majority of the educational tasks and household tasks that got added on were taken up by the women. And people talk about emotional labor, but I think of it also as whose time belongs to them. Their time doesn't belong to them. It belongs to their kids. It belongs to community. It belongs to their spouse. And then after that, if there's any left over, they get to use it for their own priorities and tasks. And And yes, there are ways that we as individuals can influence that. However, when you're culturally conditioned, when that's the expectation, and even I could, getting the school to call anyone but me when there was a problem.
I was about to say that the child is sick. Who you call the mother?
Yeah, and it's not. And there's so much to it. I don't even blame the school officials. It's just that's the burden we're dealing with. So yes, individuals do have accountability and options in a moment. And also it's really hard to be trying to stem the whole tide of a cultural like tsunami sometimes you're like, all right, I'll just do it. Like it's gonna, while this is, kind of stupid or I think it's irritating and counterproductive, I don't have the time to get my mind back. So yeah, and so if you're property, then and I feel like there were things where like, it wasn't biblically the reason that like the rape of a virgin counted was because she belonged to her father. After she wasn't a virgin, she belonged to her husband. But that was, like it once again, the infraction was against the property. It wasn't. And I think that's what it was. I was reading something about most of our rape laws are based on property laws. And so that's why the way they're set up.
My friend Jo, when she was speaking about Black women and sexuality, she was like, you have to remember that Black women during time of enslavement were raped to create more product, i.e. more children.
Yeah.
But it was to create more product. That act was. And I was like, oh, I mean, you hate to recognize, but you have to recognize it. But sometimes we kind of forget how some of this came about. It's like, yeah, this wasn't just, oh, let these two people do what they do. It's like, no, we need more hands. And so therefore we are going to create more hands. Because I have fields that need X, Y, and Z. Before we get too far in, you want to talk about, I know, right? Because but this is the beauty of this. This is the beauty of it. What I was going to look at was Wikipedia's definition of rape culture. We want to go there. You want to use that one? All right, so rape culture is a setting, as described by some sociological theories in which rape is pervasive and normalized due to that setting's attitudes about gender and sexuality. Behaviors commonly associated with rape culture include victim blaming, slut shaming, sexual objectification, trivializing rape, denial of widespread rape, refusing to acknowledge the harm caused by sexual violence, or some combination of these. And I thought to myself, when I think about the kids who are raped and molested, and in my opinion, when you force them to bring this other life into the world, it feels as if just like, look, get over it. That's how I see it. That's how it comes across to me. Because I'm just thinking, if I was the parent of that child, and we'll get into the news because there's always, God, I shouldn't say it like that. Don't do that. That's not right. There isn't always some pastor whose sins are coming to light, but it just feels like there's been so many lately. I admit, I know my triggers, crimes against kids, it's one of my triggers. I'm going to end up in jail. I don't mind putting it out there. It's going to happen because I don't understand that life.
Yeah.
I don't even understand it. And I would find myself in a really bad place if, you know what I mean? Like, I'm okay with admitting to that. That's my line, as we talked about before. So when we speak about people who are seen as trustworthy individuals beyond your parents, some of your community leaders, we have seen recently in the news a number of pastors that have groomed children to be molested, have actively molested the children in the church. Some of it has gone on for years. I know the last one was the guy who was the spiritual advisor to former President Trump, whose lawyers said that this 12-year-old girl, it was her fault that this 21-year-old married pastor traveling through Oklahoma who stayed at her parents' house, it was her fault that this sexual interaction and this relationship started.
Right. It must be her fault because the 12-year-old is clearly the person with the majority power here.
So let me go ahead and put it out how I feel when I read these stories over and over again. And I'm sure people who have seen me in other places say, wow, Gwendolyn, you have a lot of, is it animosity? No, I'll use that word though.
Passion? You have a lot of passion.
When it comes to religion and these kinds of acts. Nothing has ever happened to me. So let me just put that out there. So that's not what it comes from. I do know though, I do feel some kind of way when people abuse that power and they sully the name. Right now, religion itself, in my opinion, is man-made. They got all these man-made rules about not drinking wine and not playing cards and not wearing pants and like all this bullshit. Okay, that ain't got nothing to do with you getting into heaven or wherever you think you're going based on who you believe in and what you believe in. Nothing to do. Somebody extending their power over how you live your life and you openly agreeing to it. That's how I see it.
Right.
When I read these stories time and time and time and time again of another pastor abusing a parishioner's child, whatever, all under the name of religion. You know, I think to myself, at what point do we stop trying to blame the drag queens and those who are transgender and everybody else? There is this fascination with your natural born gender, as if that makes the difference. But you've got the call coming from inside the goddamn house. The person you should be concerned about is Uncle Bill here, sitting next to your kid. That's who you should be looking at sideways. It's not about what bathroom somebody's using or anything else of that nature. I don't know why we just refuse to acknowledge what is clearly in front of us. How many more stories do we have to hear?
I mean, at least one more, right? I don't know.
I know. I was like, do we need one more?
We just need one more, sure.
But I thought to myself, you know, you got people who are out here fixated on, well, whatever your natural born gender is the bathroom you should use because of what? Ain't no drag queen coming for your kid, right? They're not coming for your kid. Not one. The person you should be concerned about at this point in time clearly is the guy behind the pulpit.
Yeah.
So when do we start having that conversation? Or do we just, because like this one, that particular church just shut down. And then of course it comes out why it shut down.
Yeah.
They didn't want to say why. Again, there's always another, so-and-so is stepping down because they have these other concerns and they just need time with their family. It's like, we know that code language by now. Who did he molest? Who did he rape?
We're just waiting.
That story play out time and time again. That the pastor just goes missing. Or what was that? Jimmy Swaggart, I have sinned.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me get serious. Let me. No.
It's good. It's a difficult topic. We need to keep it from getting too heavy. Well, one of the things we talked about at the end of the episode last time, I went and looked it up because I was like, what did we say? And one of the things we said we wanted to talk about was who has the right to say yes and who has the right to say no.
That was our, yes, that was
right.
It. Yes.
And so I think that for me also, like framing it from that perspective of like, if you're in a church situation, right? So I think this is part of what we're dealing with. I'm here and I have been a very passionate, devout, conservative Christian. So I can speak to my own experience. And I think some of this, it can be turned into a more universal understanding. Mm-hmm. I'm here and I believe this person is representing a message, at least, of this perfect, all-loving, all-knowing being. Mm-hmm. And while I am not required, and also I've never had any religious, sexual abuse, just to say, so it's just implying anything, but while I am required, or not totally required, just do what they want, of course I have some personal motivation to follow their instructions, because I believe this is going to help me to be a better person. It's going to help me to do good in the world. It's going to help me to have a better eternal life that I think is going to happen for me. So I've got all that, and then I've got the evidence of this person who's abused that power. Mm-hmm. And now I have to confront all of these things, about, if it's been a small church, it's like, well, then was I doing the right? Was I following God's wishes? Yeah. Or was I being instructed by someone towards a betterment of myself and my community and doing good in the world? And then it becomes, so I think that's part of what we're dealing with, is that people get in, like, they get the idea that this pastor or this religion's veracity and goodness is required. They have to support it in order to be able to achieve their own peace. And then if they've got other emotional things wrapped up in it, perhaps they've lost a loved one, mm-hmm. and they've spent 20, 30 years, like, I'm going to see my mom again or whatever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now that's going to be on the line. So I think that I think that if it were pulled out of context, I don't know how to do that. Like, people could see it, but in the context of all of these other things, mm-hmm. I think it gets lost in that feeling of yearning. And it's going to sound a little crazy, and you counter me if you feel some way about this, but I feel in a certain way it gets lost in that yearning to be a better person. That's where the denials come from, and that's why they're so insidious and hard to challenge. Because it's that, like, their motivation that they're connected to, they might have other ones, or that they talk about, is that, and obviously caveat, there's plenty of people that it's another thing, but I think the rank and file and the large number of people that just put their their hands in front of their eyes and stop their ears up, that it's that confronting that this path isn't exactly what or that they have to have a different kind of responsibility around it. I don't know. I feel like that's got to be part of it.
Oh, all right. Let me take that all in. Hold on. Let me see here, because I'm trying to. I mean, clearly, this is why. Like, let's just set the stage. If we were ever to get together and really get around and, like, do it at dinner, man, we'd be so messed up because I'd be drinking and shit. You know what I'm saying? We would have gone through all the soup and nuts and then a couple of bottles of port. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be some jacked up stuff. It's like, hold up, I gotta take all that in real quick. All right, let me see if I can match that coming from a Black woman's perspective, which, in my opinion, and I've said it 100 times and I'm gonna keep saying it, I find that religion has been extremely predatory in the Black community, especially with Black women.
Yep.
Extremely predatory. I do believe that a lot of people, when they move to a different town or something, their very first place is to find a church home, because it tends to be a place where you could find like-minded individuals and perhaps create friends who have some of the same values, and it just gives you, like, a better sense of community. because, your religion has traditionally been that place, that solid place of giving you like a really good foundation. When you don't know where else to go, you go to church, right? That's
Right.
where you go. And so when I think about when people are in these churches, and let me just take out all of the molestation and things of that nature. I'm just going to talk about church in general, because whether you are raping somebody physically or taking all of their money, the impact is still the same.
Right.
This speaks to that bishop, the bling bishop up in New York, who stole his parishioners' life savings.
Yeah.
Oh boy, it gets good. Okay. So people are looking for that center of faith. And we have always been taught that this physical place, this church, is where you get it.
Mm-hmm.
So your pastor, deacon, whomever is the person that would help you strengthen the relationship that you're looking for with this higher power that you believe in. So yes, I do believe you're right. There are people who are like, no, we're all trying to be better people, and things happen, and maybe it's happened once. Okay, so maybe it's happened twice. Okay, so it's happened 5 times, but I'm gonna hold true to what's happening here, because this has been feeling really good for me, and I'm feeling solid, and I don't want to like not believe in this.
Yeah.
For me, my personal religious history was, and I talked about it, was knowing when it went from a place of following what I be to be, words from the good Lord, and you start getting these sort of man-made rules. And I'm a person who has a lot to do with zodiac. So as a Virgo, when it don't make sense, I'm like, hold on. I'm not understanding how that makes sense. Because what
Yeah.
I'm reading here isn't matching this. Like these two things aren't matching. And so you get this whole conflict of, and then you
Mm-hmm.
realize, okay, I'm not buying whatever brand you're selling. So I agree with you that people are all in because they're working towards being this better version of themselves, and they want to live a particular life, right? And of all the places where evil wouldn't happen, ideally it shouldn't happen there.
Right.
That's the idea. And then the Virgo in me,
Mm-hmm.
the realist, the
Hmm.
person who's like, newsflash, these are humans, and humans are fatally flawed, just in case you hadn't noticed.
Present company accepted. No. No, absolutely not. I'll take it right back. We are fatally flawed.
That's when it comes. That's when it comes. So, I know, like I said, nothing's happened to me in that sense, like
Right.
being Muslim, whatever. But my faith, the faith in the organization of religion, was definitely shook, because it became this sort of prosperity preaching, and women aren't allowed to do X, Y, Z. And I was a youngin' when all this came up, and I'm watching it happen to my mother. Now here's a woman who was teaching and doing Bible study, doing all this stuff, and then they came to her and said, ugh, can't really do that, because that's not what women do. And it became really ugly. And I thought, but these are supposed to be people of the faith. Like, I'm not understanding. So am I jaded? Hell yeah. Like I said, I own my biases. I know exactly where this comes from. Can anyone sway me at this point? Hell no. You want to know why? Because I read that shit every other day in the news.
Yeah.
That's why. Do I believe that there are some persons of faith that you can follow? By all means, of course there are. Yeah, I'm not saying that. You just need to make sure that you get whatever whoever you find, that's your deal. So I never tell people, oh my God, don't do this. I just know where I stand. And I
Right.
don't do organized. Like,
Well, you said something earlier that just sparked a thought in me. You said people are there and they feel good.
yes.
And I don't know if you follow the geekdom at all, but Neil Gaiman is a comic book creator. He was one of the first comics to win an award for a graphic novel that was a literary award. And he wrote some very influential comics in the 90s called The Sandman. And he was accused a few weeks ago of sexual assault by 2 women.
Really?
Yeah. And I first read it and I was like, it was, the first story I could find any details on it was, 20 or 30 years ago. And I was like, well, I think he did something wrong for sure. 100%. And I also feel like as culture, we've evolved a little bit to understand power. So I think he messed up. But then as I read more about it, I was like, oh no, this in 2022 at 63, he had sex with his 20-year-old nanny. Like the number of things wrong with that. He absolutely should know better. There's a 40-year age difference. He's a powerful, like wealthy, highly regarded, famous author, and she works for him. There's 8 things. And there's that part of me that's just like, I don't want it to be true because I love his comics so much. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to say he needs to be held accountable. He needs to be prosecuted. This is the wrong thing. And then also, and this is totally, for me, it's not the same as Faith, but I think my love of his work is pretty high, right?
Yeah.
And so now there's a complex relationship to all of this art that I have found to be influential. The same thing happened to me when Joss Whedon was outed for his problems. And it's like, and then I watch some of his stuff and knowing more about him, I see things in it that I'm like, oh, this is so gross now. I just, and so it's not particularly Faith, but I get that process again of, I feel a way.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I feel like, because we have evolved as a culture, there's a lot more of us that have more understanding that just because we feel good doesn't mean anything.
Yes.
We're just wrong. Like, that's fine. And it's a weird feeling of loss. Yeah. And I didn't hold him in high regard. I mean, I held his art in high regard. I didn't actually have like a fan base, like religion. Some people get really into a person. I didn't have any of that. I just really loved his work. And when that came out, I was like, man, I wanted to believe that the person who created this had some sense of their own responsibility. Like, right. I don't know.
I mean, so that's right. That's you hit it. If we and I know these are one of those dipping heels, but overall, I believe most humans see other humans as good human beings until otherwise proven wrong.
Yeah.
We see people like, oh, so-and-so is cool. And then you hear something, you witness something, and then it changes everything. And you're like, okay, that was foul. And I mean that across the board, like literally across the board. I mean, I'm thinking about situations where I have been in these virtual workspaces and the person that you're working with, you're like, so happy to be in this person's class. And then you see them in a light, how they treat another person. And you're just like, what is going on here? Like, who is this person? Because the person I met at the convention center and chatted with online was, I'm about community. I'm about people, rah, rah, rah. And now we're in this workspace and the most ugliest side of this person is coming out.
Yeah.
Now, I know that I have some ugly sides. I know all my angles, Aicila. I know all my angles.
You're a great photographer and a videographer. I bet you know them up, down, and all the lights, everything.
So, when I speak, I catch myself like, you can't unring that bell. Put it out there. It's out there, sis. So this is that pause, breathe. Let me think about it really quick. Let me not respond so quickly. Let me just... This is not about not being canceled, and it's none of that. It is more of a understand that yes, your words do have impact. They have power. Think about what you're about to say and why you're saying it before you say it. Now, if you're just doing it to be petty and to be ugly and to be evil, then just keep your mouth shut, because it's just not.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'm like, you know what? I am best on mute right now. Or which I have said to myself. Or I'm like, you know what? This is not good for me. I am going to disconnect out of this virtual space, this live, whatever it is. Like, yeah, I'm gonna have to bounce because it's not good for me. Remove yourself from those situations. So I say that for this. A lot of us believe that we're good humans. We want to see the best in every single person until they prove us wrong.
Yeah.
And these are the choices that we make, right? And once you go to that spot, then it's now becomes, and I believe in grace and mercy, but I also know, again, I know my biases. I was picked on in school. And if you are a bully, trust me, there's no coming back from that line either.
Yeah.
There's no coming back. Because once I've seen that that's how you really treat people, I'm thinking there's no way in the world. I won't actively go out and badmouth you. No. But if someone asks me questions about you, I will ask what it is they need to know. And then I will graciously say what has to be said without sharing every little detail about what went down. I got that much in terms of communication skills.
Yeah.
So let's get back to our topic, because we went through this whole thing of the power. And the question was, who has the right to choose?
Who has the right to say yes and no?
Who has the right to say yes or no? And we're looking at the moment, our religious leaders who by nature, just because of their position, we give a lot of leeway to. We give a lot of leeway because, it's like, well, they're in this position. I have always trusted, blah, blah, blah. And I think about the history of religion with the Black community. I mean, it was used to enslave some people. So let's just and keep them there.
Right. No yes and no there.
Yeah, right.
That's like there's no yes and no.
There's no yes and no there.
And I actually want to change that. I think we all have the right, but who has the power, I think, is the part that we need to, like, a kid doesn't have the power. Women often don't have the power.
Is it, could it be both? Could it be both?
Well, it can be. I hear us saying right, and I'm like, no, and especially when you're talking about slaves, and I'm like, no, we never had the right to kidnap them and force them to work and take, like, that was never okay, right? There was no one had the right to do that. They had the power and the dehumanization and the cruelty to do it. And it's a little semantic, but it just like I hear that and it just makes my insides kind of feel gross. And I'm like, no, I would never want to affirm anything other than there is an inalienable right to self-determination and bodily autonomy that I believe we all have. I don't think it's acknowledged, supported, recognized, or empowered. And I don't necessarily know that we understand that, but I don't feel like I just don't want to support that messaging now that I've said it.
I feel you. No, I agree with that. I don't believe that's semantics. No, that's not semantics when you say it like that. Yeah.
So, yeah. So I think it's that, like, because who do we allow, or I don't know, who do we support in their right to say that, to have access to their body and their creativity, their future.
Well, wasn't it? And my wheels are turning. And I'm thinking to myself, I could have sworn, and clearly I have to go back and check it and read it, but wasn't there something even about where marital rape had to be listed? Because the whole idea there was too that the spouse was just there for the other spouse, and whether they give consent or not. If this is what I'm feeling tonight, that's what I'm taking.
Yeah, no, it wasn't made illegal until the 80s, I think.
Right.
Like it was, it didn't exist. That wasn't. I think you're right. Like it wasn't just that it was illegal. No. It was that it didn't exist as a concept.
And what put it in this? I'm going to say they were looking at heterosexual marriages and the idea that the woman was being raped. The woman was
Mhm.
clear, like, I'm not feeling it tonight. The husband's like, I don't care how you feel. And so you have women who are like, no, I was raped by my husband.
Yeah.
I mean, like that. So it does go back to power versus
Yeah.
consensual. I mean, that's because, people saw women as property, perhaps.
Yeah.
Or that fact that now that you're married, I own you, or I have unlimited
Unfettered access. Yeah.
access. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we don't have an answer for that, do we? And I
I
don't
mean,
even
wouldn't
know
it be
if
great if
have
we did? Let's have one. The answer is stop it. Stop, everybody.
That's the answer. Damn it. That's your solution. Yeah. We went down this rabbit hole only because of what we're looking at in terms of women's rights.
Right.
That
Well,
we have a violent act that created a life.
mhm.
And as you mentioned, there should be a choice.
There should be a
And
choice.
do I bring this life to fruition, or because of where I am in my life, I can't?
Well, and when you talk about rape, because you're talking about rape culture,
Mhm.
I said one of the things I mentioned, and I pulled their research. I'm going to say the name incorrectly. It's called the SARE Center, Sexual Assault Resistance Education Center, and they're in Ontario.
Okay.
And I tracked this down because I read about it in 2017. They have an anti-sexual assault program that is evidence-based, that is more effective. At the time that I read about it, it was the only genuinely effective self-defense course in the country, maybe the world.
Mm.
And they have evidence to prove it. And so I'll share this quick. The results of what do they call? They call it RCT in here. The results of our RCT, but they don't have that. It's their rape something. Let me see if I can find out what that's supposed to stand for, because no, I don't. So I'll just read this, and they don't say that.
Okay.
So the results of our RCT were published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2015. Women who took their course, they shortened it EAAA, experienced a 46% reduction in completed rape and a 63% reduction in attempted rape in the following year compared to women in the control group. Other forms of sexual violence were also significantly reduced. Reductions in sexual assault continue to be evident 2 years later.
Huh.
And one of the things that they do that is very different in their class is they talk about, one, it's designed for self-identified women 17 to 24, because young women, including trans women, are disproportionately affected by sexual assault.
Yeah.
It emphasizes that most sexual assaults occur in homes or other situations where women should be able to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
It encourages women to trust themselves when they feel something is not right. It creates a space for exploration of women's sexual desires and right to defend their boundaries. It builds confidence in women that's needed to challenge perpetrators, who are most often men they know, friends, friends of friends, new or established romantic or sexual partners.
Mhm.
And it helps women develop tools and strategies that allow them to live freely without restricting their quality of life. And I feel like those three middle ones, but like some of the things you were talking about, emphasizing that assault is more likely to occur where you should feel safe, where you're not going to be on guard.
Yeah.
Like because it's not just a self-defense class. I'm going to teach you how to punch someone and run. They do have some of that, from what I understand. It's actually teaching women to trust themselves.
Yeah.
Instead of, well, don't make someone socially uncomfortable. No, go ahead, make them socially uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out.
Yeah.
So yeah, and they have several. I only read you the one excerpt, but they have a few excerpts on the evidence that they have about how the program works and what it is, the psychology pieces of it. And to me, when I read about that program, that and the fact that so many anti-sexual assault programs focus only on the physical aspect of being overpowered, and the fact that this one reduces attempted rape.
Attempted.
And I think it's because if you don't know what you want and what you don't want, and that you have a right to defend your boundaries, your no is going to be soft.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say someone won't challenge it. I do feel like there's a place where there's what a colleague of mine used to call sexual injury, where you were harmed. It's like if you're dancing with someone, you go to like a swing dance kind of thing and you have different partners, and you maybe don't know the rules quite as well, and you kick them in the leg. They've got a bruise, they're hurting, you need to be responsible for it. But it's not the same as if you walk up to someone and kick them in the leg.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're doing. And I want to say, not to let people off the hook, but to have some grace for the fact that young men are not taught the respectful engagement around sexual behavior any more than young women are taught how to know their boundaries and defend them. And so by giving women this information and this trust and this confidence, they're able to, my totally anecdotal assumption is that 63% reduction is those men that actually did just didn't get it. So they would have committed what my friend would call sexual injury. They got into a sexual situation ignorantly. They didn't really, understand. They were figuring it out too, and they harmed someone. And that violation was still a violation. There's no letting them off the hook, and recognizing that it is a little bit different than someone who is powering through as maybe a pastor to take advantage of a young person in their group. Like it's still a similar harm, but it's also a betrayal of emotional trust and community safety, as well as a violation of a sexual and physical nature. And so I like the fact that they have this program. I'd love to see more programs like this, and because it sounds like that could be. There's another resource. I won't talk about it too much, but I popped it in our research notes. Okay. It's a book that was written in 1998 called Unwanted Sex: The Culture of Intimidation and the Failure of Law to Address Coercive Sexual Behavior. And he kind of talks about how, like, if you're robbed, there's 800 different ways to describe it legally. There's for someone physically hurting you and taking your money. There's fraud. There's extortion. There's, all sorts of things. But when with a sexual crime, there's one, and it's equivalent to that physical attack and the taking, versus recognizing that there's a lot of ways that people can be sexually coerced and harmed that are not the same as this one definition that we have of what assault is. So I have that in there as well, because it kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with that. And unfortunately, I reread it recently. Many of the points that he makes in 1998 are still relevant, and it's a good read. I mean, it's not a good read, but it's a good read.
I shouldn't say repeat our mistakes, but repeat our mistakes. We haven't even learned yet.
Yeah,
we haven't learned yet. And when people like to, when they attempt to downplay it, like it's not that big a deal, I don't understand, or they again attempt to blame the person. Well, if she wasn't singing about this stuff, that wouldn't have happened. People have the right to express themselves sexually without receiving any kind of physical harm or response. That's nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing. And that kind of mentality and thought and response to it is like, well, if you weren't doing this, it's like, okay, so clearly you need to be in this class and a whole bunch of other classes.
And a whole bunch of other classes. I get a list.
That's not it. We are still dealing with just that base level of thought of, if you dress a certain way and act a certain way, things won't happen to you.
Right. But nuns get raped. So that's the, yes.
Yeah.
It's and I think also the thing I find interesting is that when you're talking about the victim blaming, oftentimes victims will blame themselves as well. And I think some of that's cultural. I also feel like some of that is most of us do have a sense of accountability, and we also want to feel some sense of control. Like, I want to believe that if I had been wearing something different, or, X, Y, or Z, that it would, and obviously there's ways that we can know ourselves and know our boundaries and pay attention, but it didn't say it reduced all attempted rape. It reduced 63% attempted rape, which is great statistic. I love it. Going in the right direction.
Yeah.
And there's still going to be places where you can't anticipate, and you're not going to be, so I really get that sense of wanting to be accountable, and be accountable in terms of recognizing, like, oh, this is what I can know for my future. This is how I can show up differently with my friends, right? Like, and I think that's part of it too. Like, making sure you're with people that will take care of you if you get too drunk or whatever, especially when you're young and you might be out doing silly things or whatever. And it's not your fault that somebody looked at your vulnerability and chose to exploit it rather than protect it.
Yeah.
Or respect it, right?
Oh. I believe we did a fairly good job on covering most of this. At least starting the conversation and sharing the resources that you have shared. It's a good start.
Yeah.
It's a good start. We need more good starts.
Yeah.
We just need to get the conversation started versus pretending that it didn't happen or ignoring what is clearly happening in front of us.
Right.
And that listening part and the trusting of what you see with your eyes or what your gut is saying to you. It's not there just because. There's a reason why your spidey sense is going off. It's like something doesn't feel right.
Right. You have to trust yourself. And women, and I think people of color and Black people and Indigenous and brown people in our country are constantly told not to trust themselves because it makes them easier to exploit. We are easier to exploit when we do not trust ourselves.
Yeah.
And that goes into capitalism. Sorry, guys. I can always go there. I mean, I'm always happy to talk about.
Is that going to be the one for our next episode? Is capitalism? You want to go there?
I mean, we can. We also have we've got surveillance culture. We
do have surveillance culture,
meritocracy, but I'm happy to go to, because you could also say surveillance culture is next, because that's that you don't have the right to your biometric data. It's a similar kind of conversation. I have a great story for that one too, because I think I sent you the lady that I follow that talks about opting out, and it was an interesting experience to say, all right, I'm going to try opting out.
Really?
Internally, not even like the external piece, just my own internal piece of like, oh, yeah. But I'm gonna save that for when we do that episode.
Yes. So we're thinking surveillance culture.
Yeah, let's do that. Unless you're more excited about capitalism, because
we can do surveillance culture next. That's cool. That's cool. All right, people. Surveillance culture is what we'll be covering next.
We'll be watching you. You watch us.
Oh my God.